Today I'm going to show you how to set up a charge pipe injector using Holley EFI. If you have any questions after watching this video, please reach out to me in my email, HighPerfConsulting@gmail.com. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to load the water meth ICF. Then we're going to go to it and we're going to select the injector duty cycle mode. This gets rid of some background logic that happens on these other two modes that basically change the value in the table to a different value in the background, so you won't get the fuel you'll think you'll want. So it's just very important if you're doing a charge pipe injector and not using the Holley EFI water meth solenoids that you select this. Then you select the number of outputs based on whether you're using one or two solenoid or one or two injectors, excuse me. And then your output mode, if you're using two, you'll have to decide if you want to do sequential or parallel. Sequential will ramp up the first injector until it's static and then go to the second injector and do the same. So a table value of 50% when using sequential would mean that one injector is static and the other is about to start. A table value of 75 would mean that one injector is static and the other one is at 50% duty cycle, and 100% would mean both are static. When in parallel, what they do is if you put a 50% value in, both injectors will be on 50% of the time, but they will be phased 360 degrees from each other, meaning that 50% duty cycle would be 360 degrees of rotation, because 100% duty cycle is 2 engine rotation, 720 degrees. So what we do is we will phase one injector one cycle off from the other, so that at 50% or above duty cycle, both will be spraying at least some of the time. Excuse me, rephrase that. You will always have fuel going into the charge pipe if you're above 50% duty cycle with the parallel setup. Once you have these set up, you can go and set the table values up. I recommend going with a 0 here, and that way you can always keep this line at 0, and when you let off the gas and you go out of boost, it'll automatically shut off. You don't have to think about it. And then from there, I would just do something where you ramp in some amount, and then you can just blend it from there. I'm not going to bother setting up RPM lines and all that. I mean, you know what you need for your application. Then lastly, you have to set your output for it. And something I think a lot of people don't know is that you can select an injector driver. And if you're using a Dominator ECU, you've now just unlocked one of those 4 extra drivers to drive that big injector. This comes in super handy on a Dominator ECU where you don't have to buy an injector driver box and set it up in the system ICF like you might have thought you would have otherwise. Meaning, when I go to the pin map here, now let me back up. Meaning you can see we have 2 sets of injectors here. We're using the custom injection type. One way to do it would be to go to the second set and set it to some other amount of injectors and do it that way. But instead, when you look at the pin map, you'll see that you've got your outputs here for your second 8 injectors as you normally would. And then when you go to the view injectors, you've got your primary 8 injectors, but also these last 2 right here are water meth solenoid 1 and water meth solenoid 2, meaning all you have to do is run power to the injector and run the ground side to these 2 pins, and it will control an injector with a 8 and 2 drive current. So to say that a different way, you can run a billet atomizer or other racing injector, other large injector with the water meth table on these 2 extra injector drivers. And that allows you to have the charge pipe injectors without having to buy an injector driver box. And it also actually gives you excellent control. The last bonus thing you can do with this setup the way it is you can go to an advanced table and you can offset the fueling based on that water meth duty cycle. You put fuel in the charge pipe and most of it evaporates, but some is going to actually make it into the cylinders, and it's going to mess up your target air fuel some amount. So what you can do is you can do a fuel flow offset and base it off the water meth solenoid 1 and solenoid 2. So if you only had 1 solenoid, you'd do 1 table. If you had 2 solenoids, you'd probably do 2 tables. Or depending on how you set things up, you could just put it in 1 table. But what we do is we have 0 to 100% duty cycle. Now this is effectively injector duty cycle. So at 100% you'll have the flow rate of your injector. For example's sake, we'll say it's a 700 pound billet atomizer. So what you do is, I put in a positive number, that's backwards. What you really want is to pull 700 pounds out, because when that charge pipe injector is on, it's adding 700 pounds of fuel to the motor. And then you would just linearize it down to 0. Now this obviously isn't perfect. This is actually wrong the way I just did it, but it gives you the idea. What you'll end up really doing is finding that you'll need to tune this table for your application. Depends on how much fuel is evaporating in the charge pipe and in the intake before it gets to the intake, or before it gets to the cylinder, excuse me. So what you'll end up doing is probably leaving this mostly zeroed, or putting something like, you know, a small amount here, and then ramping it like that. But the point here is you'll need to tune this, but it does allow you to correct for that charge pipe fuel without having to rape your fuel table or do other cockeyed bull crap to make it run down the track properly. That's all I have for today. If you have any questions or if you'd like help setting this up for your car, by all means, shoot me an email to HighPerfConsulting@gmail.com. If I can help with your tuning needs in any other ways, also feel free to reach out. Thank you. Have a great day.